Mass Effect Legendary Edition is out, now being the ideal way to play the Mass Effect trilogy over the original releases. So for the occasion, I'm deciding to review each Mass Effect game in detail with the Legendary Edition updates, changes, and improvements. So of course, we have the game that started the trilogy, Mass Effect 1. The history of this game can be described as, after BioWare had made Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, they decided to make their own sci-fi universe to have even more creative freedom than they had with KOTOR. Thus, a trilogy of sci-fi RPGs was conceptualized. Mass Effect 1 was originally released in 2007 for the Xbox 360 and PC, with a PlayStation 3 port being made later down the line when the EA acquisition on BioWare occurred. Mass Effect stands out from the crowd of other RPGs for its original unique design for RPG standards. Mass Effect was designed to be more cinematic with a voice protagonist and a simplistic dialogue wheel, which eventually led to it being a bad influence, as it led to Dragon Age 2's bad reception and clearly inspiring games like Fallout 4, a release that also disappointed players. Fallout 4 is a prime example. Many seem to really dislike Fallout 4 because of its core design being so similar to Mass Effect. Now, the reason Mass Effect has garnered no hate for its design is because the franchise was designed with these sorts of RPG mechanics like the voice protagonist, while Fallout 4 was a main entry in a series that was originally designed with very traditional RPG mechanics, with the game being dumbed down, along with more lacking player choices compared to previous games. Mass Effect works because its franchise was designed the way it's supposed to be. Now, I'd actually like to see a more traditional RPG version of Mass Effect, but I doubt it will happen. Mass Effect as a trilogy is about a human called Commander Shepard, who discovers a galactic threat and does everything to stop it. That's the basic outline for the experience. When we start the game, we get to create our Commander Shepard. Despite the set surname, we do get to choose a gender, a first name, one of 3 set backstories, and a reputation that gives us starting points for the morality system, Paragon versus Renegade. For this critique, we will look at both Paragon and Renegade Shepards, the Paragon being female and the Renegade being male. The female Shepard is a caring, compassionate human being who is the beacon of hope and inspiration, while the male Shepard is a cruel, sadistic, evil person who kills people because he can. Another thing to note about my male Shepard is that he's a womanizer, that being, he has his way with women. In the first game, my male Shepard had intimacy with the consort, Liara, and whoever is romanceable in these games. Shepard is the type of guy who just sees every woman as his next conquest, and he'll immediately cheat on his current partner just because. Like, look at what happens when he flirts with 2 members of his crew, and when confronted with a choice on picking one or the other, look at what he says.
Why do I have to make a choice? Maybe the 3 of us could,
In your dreams, Commander. I hope you two, or however many you end up with, will be happy together. If you don't mind, I need to clean my gear.
What the f***? So you get the idea. My male Shepard is a horrible human being. I played as the female Shepard first, then the male. I completed them both back to back so I could get a grip on how it felt playing them so close to one another. So our game starts with Shepard looking into space with 3 central characters, Captain Anderson, Ambassador Udina, and Admiral Hackett, discussing Shepard as a candidate for something that will be revealed in a bit. Mass Effect plays a lot like a movie. In other RPGs, let's take Skyrim as an example, the story relies on a lot on first-person experiences. When you go to talk to someone, it's mostly just the character standing and talking to you. But in Mass Effect, it plays out more dramatically, like Mass Effect was heavily inspired by science fiction films of the 1970s. The game starts fine, that's what I'll say. They establish the first few minutes to establishing the characters and eventually the world, like any game should. It doesn't blow your balls off and get you excited, because unlike Star Wars, the game starts off calm. In this intro, we get the text about the future of humanity discovering other civilizations when they discovered ancient advanced technology on Mars, and they use it to jump technology ahead 200 years. Mass Effect, as in the name of why it's called that, is basically what the civilizations of the galaxy call it when they make discoveries like this. The music for this intro is actually really good. It's very atmospheric, calm, and it's really digitity, if that's a word, and humble. Although there are a lot of intense tracks when the game demands it, the composer did a good job with the music, as the music is fitting for everything in this game. It's not the kind of music you'll listen to in your free time if you like soundtrack music, but it adds to the atmosphere of the game. So bravo! We get our first bit of characterization when they do everything to establish what's happening. So basically, three of the most powerful species, the Asari, the Turians, and the Solarians, have a council on an ancient space station known as the Citadel that at this point are the main players in the galaxy. Humanity as a species has come late to the galactic community, so they are at a disadvantage when it comes to the main three. In most sci-fi stories set in space, humans are a big player in the galaxy because of course they be. Making the three main characters human makes them more relatable to audiences. So Mass Effect has a unique spin to the whole thing. They're not small, but they're not as big as they'd be in something like Star Trek. Although sometimes it's hard to tell that humans are newcomers because there's a lot of them in the game. I would have expected them to be a little more scarce, because they show up quite a lot in this game. So it doesn't exactly give the impression that they're newcomers, but they do show us that humans are second class, and hated by a lot of other species. So there's that. So points for originality. Each species has its own faction. The Human Alliance, the Asari Republics, etc. Commander Shepard, no matter what backstory you chose for him or her, will always be part of the Human Alliance Navy. The game establishes that an agent of the Citadel Council, a Spectre, is on board the Normandy, the trademark ship for this franchise, and you, Commander Shepard, are going to Eden Prime. Our first dialogue option is quite small. It's basically a conversation between Kaidan and Joker, two of the crew members that accompany you in this game. To get our first Paragon or Renegade points, we basically choose an option from the dialogue wheel. Right up is the Paragon option, right middle is the mixed or neutral option, and right down is the Renegade option. So it's a really simple system. It works for Mass Effect because it was designed to be that way from the very start. So of course we have a set voice actor. Mark Meir if you're male, and Jennifer Hale if you're female. Both of them have a Canadian accent, so that's essentially your set voice. Many players would prefer an RPG if they just saw text, because the player character is a reflection of the player and his or her choices controlling that character. In Mass Effect, we basically have a semi-alive character, because we hear him or her speak to other characters. Of course, the simplistic dialogue system has a lot of issues. First, the dialogue isn't representative of what Shepard's going to say, and also, a lot of the three options can actually be the same, so it's just illusion of choice sometimes. Having a voice protagonist may cause issues, because when you're playing a role-playing game, you're supposed to imagine the player speaking and sounding like whatever you want. It makes it easier to roleplay when there's no voice lines, and also, voice protagonists generally tend to bog down RPGs, like it does here. This game isn't really about the choices we make, it's more so of a game on how we do things. The player is of course forced into a main quest. You have to be part of the Alliance Navy in the first game, you have to be Cerberus in the second, and you have to be Alliance again in the third. So you have set enemies, but the choices you get are more so how you go about these affiliations. In the first game, for example, you're basically deciding whether to be a good or bad soldier. Are you a war hero or criminal? That's basically what changes. The main plot doesn't change, only how you approach the main plot. There's actually few instances where you actually get true player choice in the whole trilogy. And that's fine, because Mass Effect was designed as a more simple, linear role-playing game, and besides, you still have all the mechanics of leveling up with stats and perks. That too is simplified, but it's there, and of course you have different classes, although I always play as a soldier because that's the safe option for me. So anyways, we are called to the meeting room by our superior Captain Anderson, voiced by Keith David, who I best know as Childs in The Thing and the Arbiter in Halo. We get to interact with some other people like Private Jenkins and Dr. Chakwas, which is a small interaction and not an impactful one, but it's there for character building, I suppose, although both characters are quite minor in this game. We go to the meeting room where we get more information about our mission. We are going to Eden Prime, a human colony. Our mission is to retrieve a Prothean beacon, Protheans being an ancient race that existed almost 50,000 years ago, this game taking place in 2183. The captain shows up, and Joker tells us about a distress call from Eden Prime, where we see a video feed with soldiers being attacked by unknown invaders. So now we'll have to proceed with caution. After a debriefing with Shepard, Kaidan, and Jenkins, we now get access to proper gameplay. One of the improvements you will immediately notice is that Shepard can sprint without being in combat, although his or her stamina isn't very long. I would have personally preferred it to be twice the length. One of my earliest personal criticisms is that you can only play as Shepard. In Knights of the Old Republic, every squad member was playable. How cool would it have been to switch to another character? Something I don't like about this game is that even if your squad is alive, when you reach 0 health, it's game over, which is why I would have personally liked to switch to another character that is alive. I also would have liked squad mates being playable, because there would be potential for choices outside of Shepard. In Knights of the Old Republic 2, there are some points where you play as a squad mate. How interesting would it have been, for example, if on Virmire, when you picked either Kaidan or Ash, you could actually play as them and command Captain Kirahi's squad. That would have been cool. I mean, after all, Shepard influences his squad mates a lot. Why not give them player-chosen decisions as well? I know it's not a fault with the game, but I think it would have made the game better. If KOTOR could do it, why not this? KOTOR was also the predecessor, so I think it should be an active comparison. Early on in the mission, Jenkins will be killed, and there's absolutely no way to save him. Jenkins' fate is that he always dies. All we really get is whether to respect his death or to tell Kaidan to carry on with the mission. And there's not much really to it. I kinda wish Jenkins wasn't such a throwaway character. There was potential there, especially in the early game, where Jenkins is an Eden Prime native. Had Jenkins been more of a fleshed out character, I could easily see him being motivated with the destruction of his home by Saren, being further reckless, and there can be a subplot about him learning to stop being so arrogant. I would have liked something, to be honest. I think that was a huge missed opportunity, and I don't think it would have jeopardized the whole game's design. I think his insight onto Eden Prime would have been interesting, but he's cast aside for the actual second human squad mate, Ashley Williams. She is the sole surviving member of her battalion, the 212th, which is probably a Star Wars reference, because that was the numbered battalion Obi-Wan commanded. We get more insight on the situation through Williams, which I like, and so we bring her along with us. Also, another thing, we have to bring 2 squad mates with us. The player isn't given the choice to go solo if they so desire, which I mean, you'll need the help, but give the player the option of going alone if they want to. Here is a perfect time to talk about the combat. It's an improvement over the original release, which is saying something. The original game was quite clunky. Well, here's what's different. Weapons are snappier, the sniper rifle actually stays in one place instead of jiggling around, and aiming is way better. Plus, you can melee at any time. Sound effects on weapons also feel like they have more of a punch, which makes the combat feel way better, and cover is snappier and isn't as slow as the original game. Now, there are complaints about the atmosphere of Eden Prime in the original game compared to the remaster. I don't think it's an issue. After a few minutes, I hardly noticed that there was any difference. The mission still feels the same in atmosphere. Back to the story, we find out that a bunch of synthetics called the Geth are attacking this planet, and the Geth as enemies are passable. Of course, they're different enemy types throughout the game, and the Geth are quite tough later in the game. They can rush towards you sometimes if you get too close, and they're everywhere in some parts. In fact, there's swarms of enemies all the time. We also fight husks. transformed abomination to the Geth created from Eden Prime's residence. Alongside this, there are some minor interactions between survivors and us, like a pair of scientists, and you have the choice of knocking out the mentally unstable one, which kind of feels like an evil decision that came out of nowhere, and the option just exists to make us gain renegade points. There's also a bunch of survivors who are involved with a smuggling operation, and we convince them to give us some of the smuggled equipment, with further mention that a guy named Pal is the one behind the smuggling. Eventually we come across Nihilus's dead body, as Nihilus went out ahead of us on the mission. In a cutscene, we see what happened to him. A fellow Spectre named Saren tricked him and shot him in the back. We hear a noise behind the crates where we meet Pal, the smuggler. He basically tells us about how he saw Saren kill Nihilus, but Saren didn't see him from behind the crates. You can confront him on how he survived, where he basically explained that he's a slacker and he was taking a nap behind the crates, or in a smuggling operation, where you can get some extra stuff from him. Of course, for all of this you need a speech check on either Paragon or Renegade. So now that we have a name, we go after Saren when we go to a tram. We see Saren order the Geth to destroy the place, and when we arrive, we have to deactivate all the bombs. Thank God there's no stupid minigame here. We just press a button, wait a few seconds, and deactivate the bombs. When that's completed, we wipe out all the Geth, and then we come across the beacon we were sent to retrieve in the first place. But we get caught in the beacon and we get an unclear vision about death and destruction. And then the beacon explodes and we pass out. Not a bad start. The main character and his world has been well established and there's an obvious conflict that drives the rest of the story. It's a basic setup. It doesn't start perfectly, like as we'll see in the very next cutscene, and Asari informs Saren that the beacon has been destroyed with one of the humans using it, and so Saren has a goddamn fit for no reason, which feels really cliche and out of character for Saren, given what his character is like for the entire game outside of this scene. So we wake up in the Normandy sickbay, where we speak to Dr. Chakwas and either Caden or Ash, depending on what gender you choose to play as, and we essentially recount the vision. And Dr. Chakwas mentions rapid eye movement. We've been out for 15 hours, and we're heading back to the Citadel. Captain Anderson shows up and discusses the happenings on Eden Prime with us. Anderson reveals a past history with Saren, and the description Anderson gives us enforces the fact that he's going to be the villain. Since Saren is a Spectre who works for the Council, it's going to be hard to prove to the Council that he attacked Eden Prime with a Geth. So the point is, we go to the Citadel, which, first impressions, looks amazing, a glory to behold. But since this is a more mature game, there will be very little kids who will be wowed at a spectacle like the Citadel. But I like the design of it. It fits everything else in the game so far. To describe the visual design, it feels very retro-futuristic. Like, I doubt this is what the future will look like, but the designs serve a purpose. You take the aliens, for example. The point of the Asari was to have a race entirely made up of attractive women. The Solarians were based off of stereotypical Area 51 aliens, you know what I'm talking about, and so on. And since I know it will come up, let's talk graphics. Usually the graphics are a hit or miss sort of affair. Either it looks better, or it looks like they tried to upgrade it, but it just looks like plastic. I'm looking at AC3 Remastered. Usually it's not that much of an issue because you get all of the DLC alongside the main game, unless you're Modern Warfare Remastered, where from what I hear, they charged you for all the DLC all over again at a higher price than the original, and a lot of other blunders like no mod support for PC. Just a mess all around. Thankfully, the Legendary Edition has everything a remaster should have, so I'm not complaining. I got the same experience I got in the original game. I do have a gripe with some textures as the look is a bit off, but it's not a game killer for me. So anyways, we meet Ambassador Udina, who sets up a meeting with the Council, and then scorns us for failing the mission. You see, we were also being considered for the Spectres by Nihilus, but now that he's dead, we've killed that opportunity. But we have a meeting with the Council set up. We get to explore the entire Citadel as well. I like the Council. It's a great hub for the side quests and stuff. Since I'm the sort of guy who likes to finish Mass Effect 1 one quickly, because the combat is clunky and I just want to move on to the second game, I of course tend to skip over a lot of the throwaway conversations, but that hasn't changed in the remaster. Although the combat is more bearable, I tend to want to complete it as quickly as possible, but I couldn't be bothered completing any of the side content aside from Bring Down the Sky DLC. So with that being said, we meet most of our squad mates on the Citadel. You might say that this is a case of pacing issues, and to that I say it's great. I usually hate it when we don't get much time with companions as we would with this game. Going back to Knights of the Old Republic, assuming you're playing the game in the Legends canon order, Jolie Bindo will be your late game companion, and he's arguably the best one. So it'd be nice to have him earlier. With this game, all but one of the companions join your party on the Citadel, so it's a neat convenience more than a hindrance. It's definitely something the game does better than a lot of other RPGs. So we meet fan favourite Garrus Vakarian, who is trying to gather evidence on Saren's doings, but fails. So we're going to meet the council in what can be described as a sham trial that goes on for less than 5 minutes. Of course, it's stated that the council will side with Saren over us, because even though we have an eyewitness with no affiliation to us witness Saren killing Nihilus, the Solarian councillor just says that the testament of one dock worker is hardly compelling proof, which I kind of expected him to say the first time round playing this game. So of course there's a bunch of back and forth, with Saren expressing hatred for humanity, and of course we lose. So with that, we need to find proof that Saren was behind the attack on Eden Prime. Udina suggests talking to a chap named Harkin, a drunken loser who lost his job recently, as he has information on where Garrus went, as he was close to uncovering something about Saren. So of course, we have to go to a strip club, because that's where he is. What's a miracle is that we have transport in every area to go to a different location, so it spares us from having to walk. A neat convenience. Going to Cora's Den, the strip club I just mentioned, we are attacked by assassins who work for Saren, but joke's on them, they die. There are a surprising amount of different enemies, so I'll give the game makers that. We go into the strip club where there's not much to do. The strippers aren't exactly wearing the most revealing attire ever, which kind of defeats the purpose of a strip club, but whatever. We have an encounter between Rex and a Krogan bouncer, then we go talk to Harkin, and if you play as a female shepherd, he makes comments about your body, so it's reason to dislike him because he's no Han Solo. He's just a creepy sexist jerk. We talk to him about Garrus's whereabouts, which is actually easier than it should be for a female shepherd. I would have expected Harkin to force you to have Well, point is, he gives us directions to the med clinic. So we head straight there, where thugs are harassing the doctor, but with the help of Garrus, we kill the thugs. We speak to the doctor, who explains that the thugs wanted to shut her up about a Quarian who acquired data about Saren, and she'll be walking into a trap with Saren's men set up by the owner of Cora's Den, Fist. So we recruit Garrus, although interestingly, there's an option to deny him, but who would do that? Character aside, he's a great companion to bring with you. Well, anyways, it's back to Cora's Den, but of course there's a barrage of enemies, and this is where I really started to use cover. Cover is a big part of Mass Effect, although it won't always save you, as rocket enemies can always get past that, or worse, enemies can run up to you, like a lot of Krogan enemies and some of the Geth. One thing about combat that's starting to become an issue is that grenades are useless. They're very low damage, so I don't understand why you carry a limited amount of them as if they're useful. We kill all the thugs, where we are given a small choice on whether or not you spare 2 dock workers who are obviously in no position to fight. After that, we have our encounter with Fist. He's super easy, just shoot him instead of the turrets and you'll be fine. So we defeat Fist, who tells us that the Quarian is being led into an ambush, and he tells us the exact location. So we get to choose whether to spare or kill him. Personally, I'd kill him, but since I'm strictly trying to be Paragon for that specific playthrough, I let him live. But on my Renegade playthrough, I enjoy myself.
Too many people died here, Fist. You don't get to walk away.
So we're given a super easy time limit, which usually I hate time limits, but this is perfectly acceptable, because they give you plenty of time. We get to the Quarian, whom we save from Saren's men, we introduce ourselves and we go back to the human embassy. The Quarian, named Tali for short, plays the recording that proves Saren is a traitor, and reveals more about his plan. He's working to find the conduit along with the gal we heard back in this cutscene. So we take it to the council, and the council finally revokes Saren's Spectre status, along with all attempts being made to bring him to justice. And when I say that, I mean the council just sits on its ass and does very little. Just like real politicians. But we convinced the council to promote us to Spectre, which allows us to new perks. Before then, we were quite limited on skills. So with that, Commander Shepard is now a Spectre for the council, and we are granted as much power as possible to get the job done. I quite like this scene. The music picks up and they truly give us the impression that we've achieved something special. And the fact that we automatically level up enforces this. We've really achieved something. So with that being said, we go meet up with Captain Anderson and Ambassador Udina, where the captain is stepping down from command. Now we're in charge of the ship. So just like Knights of the Old Republic, we have to go to different planets in any order we choose. Anderson and Udina also mention that the voice from the recording, Matriarch Benenzia, has a daughter, Liara Tassoni. So with that being said, we get to choose where to go. Usually when I play this game, I go do the Bring Down the Sky DLC first, which is essentially stopping a Batarian terrorist group from landing an asteroid on a planet, the stakes being insanely high. Since it's just a DLC, I'll touch on it briefly. You go around the asteroid, deactivating stuff, and then when you're met by the leader of Space ISIS, who has a couple of hostages, you have to either allow him to walk away, or turn a blind eye to stop the terrorist at any cost. That's actually quite a great decision. I'm glad it's not a choice I would have to make. Terrorists force soldiers and whoever the hell else to choose between certain things and use hostages often. I don't want to get too political though, I just wanted to give points for realism. Do you let a terrorist go to save the few, or do you stop the terrorist in his tracks to save many more? Because people will die regardless. With that being said, that's Bring Down the Sky for you. I decided to go to Therum first after that. That's where Liara Tassoni is located, and we essentially go around the planet in the Mako. In the original game, the Mako was a bouncy mess. Well, in this remaster, must I say, what an improvement over the first version. My favourite change is that the Mako now has rocket boosters, so it's there for people who hate the driving section and want to get them over with. With that being said, the Mako is less bouncy, although there were several instances of me flipping the Mako over like a turtle, struggling to get back up on the right side. I heard that the two are interchangeable, so it's there if you feel like being bouncy all over again. These driving sections are kinda lame, to be honest. You just drive until you get to a point where you have to get out of the Mako. Geths surround the whole area, and as such, you'll need to fight them off. The hardest part is when the Geth Colossus comes up, and without the Mako, it's a tough fight. It's quite challenging because I died many times. You pretty much have to be in cover constantly. Also, there were these really annoying enemies that jump up all over the place. I usually hate enemies like that, and this game is no exception. I think this enemy should have been cut out. Entering the excavation site, we go down some elevators and we finally meet Liara. She's trapped by a Prothean beam or something, and we have to find a way to free her. There's this device that will dig a way to Liara if we bring out the right code, which is easy. We get to Liara, deactivate the beam holding Liara in place, and with that, she's free. We go up an elevator and we fight a sort of mini-boss, our Krogan and the Geth that accompany him. No thanks to Liara or my squad mates, we defeat the Krogan and get out of there. So we recruit Liara after we get some more information on the conduit, the activation device mentioned earlier in the game that Saren is looking for. Liara also gives more insight into the Protheans' extinction, that it's a mystery on how they went extinct. So with that being said, we get to choose the next location. Just like Knights of the Old Republic, companions are available to talk to for whatever reason, including the romance subplots. Although Garrus and Tali aren't romanceable until the second game, in their place we get 3 possible romance options for both genders. 2 for each. There's Ash, Kaidan, and Liara. And since I know it will come up, there's technically also the consort, but forget about her, it was more of a one-night stand. I've played through all 3 romance subplots, and I gotta say, Liara is the most compelling. I'm no romantic myself, I can barely get girls to talk to me, but Liara is really interesting as a character. Since she and Shepard are part of 2 different species, the conflict is Liara coming to terms with her feelings for someone different to her, and that's interesting stuff. Very real world message for stuff in general, not just romance. It's kind of lackluster for Ash and Kaidan. I wasn't very interested in their stories. Also, a side note, Kaidan is bisexual, but he's not romanceable until the 3rd game, which I don't get. I had to search, and it seems like they just retconned Kaidan from being straight to bi in the 3rd game, without accounting for why a male Shepard couldn't romance them without mods in the 1st game. They kind of just threw it in, because there's no gay options until the 3rd game. So gay players missed out for the first 2 games. Well anyways, Liara has the most interesting romance arc. In my opinion, there should have been more than 3, because this is the same amount Knights of the Old Republic had as well. So next up, Novaria, a snow planet in a system close to the local cluster. Our first encounter is a standoff with the local cops, after which we learn that Matriarch Benezia has been through here, and she went to a facility close to where we landed. But to get to this facility, we need a garage pass to drive there. So of course, there's multiple different ways of getting the garage pass, and this is the most player freedom in the entire game. I think there's actually 7 unique ways with variations. That being said, the garage pass thing really annoyed me. You have to talk to a guy called Lorik, who gives you access to his office, which is under investigation by shady cops. We have to get the information from his computer, fight some dirty cops as a mini-boss, and then we decide what to do with the evidence. The most paragon thing you can do is get the corrupt guy arrested, and the most renegade thing you can do is of course get both the corrupt guy and the undercover cop killed. So with that being said, we get a garage pass and drive all the way to the facility. This part of the game always annoyed me. The driving isn't too bad, but the Novaria facility just sucks. There's swarms of enemies and a lot of backtracking to get stuff online and working. And when you get to the survivor camp, there's a lot of side quests that I couldn't be bothered doing. We get to Matriarch Benezia, and as expected, we get unique dialogue with Liara if we bring her with us. I didn't mention this before, but Benezia is voiced by Marina Sirtis, who Star Trek fans will recognize as Deanna Troi from Star Trek The Next Generation. Of course, they have a couple of Star Trek actors throughout the trilogy, I think. I didn't watch a lot of Star Trek to be honest, and I'm guessing that there's a lot of other actors with prominent sci-fi roles. Benezia is a boss, and we have to survive 3 waves of enemies from Hisari commandos. This is where I really started to use my and my companions' abilities. You see, depending on their specialty, you will get abilities like overpowering weapons to immunity, and other useful stuff. This is the further reason why I wanted to play as companions earlier, so that we could personally use their specialties instead of commanding them to do it. The difficulty on Benezia's wave attacks is moderate. If you position yourself properly, it shouldn't be too hard. We defeat Benezia and we find out that Saren's flagship Sovereign has influenced her thoughts and loyalty, and so she tries to redeem herself before going crazy and attacking us again. We defeat her and she passes away. Then we have a choice to close this planet segment. When we enter the facility, we fought a species called the Rachni, and the Rachni Queen asks us to release her. We can choose whether to give her species a second chance or to wipe them out. A choice that was sort of invalidated in the 3rd game, but whatever. As you know, depending on my playthrough, I either did the heroic thing or the evil thing, and that's the end of Novaria. Around this time, we receive a transmission from the council adding a new location, Virmire, which I always complete last. I went on to do Feros, which I also don't particularly enjoy. It's a ravaged world because of the Geth attack there. We meet a colony called Zoo's Hope, and we help them against the Geth, until we have to go to Exogeny headquarters. This involves another driving section in a straight line. We get interactions between some Exogeny survivors, with one woman requesting that we find her daughter Lisbeth, and with that, we drive to Exogeny headquarters, where the Geth has set up camp. We find Lisbeth, and she gives us our keycard that we use to access a terminal after killing a Krogan that reveals the colony of Zoo's Hope is being mind-controlled by a plant known as the Thorian. So we go back to the survivor camp with us having to settle a dispute through a speech check or through shooting, but regardless we get a specific gas for our grenades that will need to knock out survivors that attack us. Or we can decide to wipe them all out. Of course, the renegade option is quicker because killing everything is sort of what we do. There's also a grenade crate later down the line that I didn't realize existed when I sorely needed it through a Paragon playthrough. This is the time I actually need more than 5 grenades. I haven't played enough of this game to see whether there are storage increases, but I'm guessing that there is. But if so, I have zero idea how to acquire any of this. We travel to the sub-level and confront the Thorian, and there's another annoying section where we have to destroy nodes to kill the Thorian. But the thing is, there's swarms of enemies that run up and attack, enforced by a Nasari clone created by the Thorian. And the nodes won't take as much damage depending on how much of the Thorian created enemies you've killed. There's also no checkpoints to my knowledge, so the whole thing is just an endurance test, a tedious one. Something about the combat is still clunky despite the improvements. I guess the first game really required a lot of work to make the combat system decent. I guess converging the second game wasn't an option. Well, anyways, we killed everything after nearly dying a lot of times, and we talked to the template the Asari clones were based on. She gives us information about the conduit, and thus, we get a choice of whether to kill her since she once worked for Saren, or to let her make amends for her mistake. Then we've got my favourite of the bunch, Virmire. The start is okay, it's just another driving section fighting past Geth, shutting down turrets, and getting past checkpoints, and with that, we essentially get to a Solarian militia commanded by Captain Kirahi. He tells us that Saren is breeding Krogan for his army and that they need to destroy the facility. Rex intervenes because the Krogan are on the brink of extinction and Saren has just created a cure for the genophage, the virus designed to wipe his race out. So obviously we need to talk to Rex. Either we convince him that Saren will just use the genophage cure to spread destruction, or we'll be forced to kill him. Paragon Shepard convinced him to stand down, but Renegade Shepard just killed him and told Kirahi to dump his body wherever.
Commander, are you alright?
I'm feeling a hell of a lot better than he is.
With that being said, we are then given the choice to either have Kaidan or Ash assist Kirahi on the assault on Saren's base. We, in turn, are sent a different path into the base. From what I know, having Kirahi survive is rather complicated, and I've never completed it. Not once. With that being said, we infiltrate the base. We can assist Kirahi with optional objectives, which is how we're supposed to survive, but it never works for me. We go through the beach, the outskirts of the base, inside the base. We come across captured members of Kirahi's squad who have been indoctrinated. We go through the lab, into Saren's private files. We find a beacon akin to the one on Eden Prime before we are met with Sovereign, who, as it turns out, isn't a ship. He's a sentient machine, an actual Reaper. Sovereign taunts us, and we just smack talk each other before Sovereign hangs up. The music really picks up here, so I'll give it that. And Sovereign's voice is very intimidating. We go back to the path, where eventually we plant the nuke in the base. Either Kaidan or Ashley, depending on who we choose to accompany Kirahi, tells us that they need assistance. To where we are confronted with a choice. Both Kaidan and Ash are pinned down, and we can only save one. Paragon Shepard chose to save Alenko, while Renegade chose to save Ashley. But no matter who you choose to save, we are confronted by Saren. It's here where we get a little bit into Saren's ideas. He doesn't believe he's doing any evil. As he explains, he believes that the Reapers will spare those who surrender, which of course no one buys, and after a brief boss fight, he flees, and we're forced to bring the person we chose to save and go, killing the one we chose to stay behind. So the rest of the trilogy has these characters interchangeable. Let's talk about it. Kaidan or Ash surviving doesn't really have that much of a difference to each other. aside from the change of voice actor. They still play the exact same role in the following games. So I think the only thing that changes is the romance subplot. Both of them are different, but that's about it. I've tried both and they're essentially the same. But afterwards, Liara decides to try a mind probe, given the vision we got back on Eden Prime, and try to see where the conduit is. So we do just that, and the conduit is on a planet called Ilos. Just one problem. Ilos is out of Citadel space, so we need to go back to the Citadel until we can figure it out. But when we arrive back on the Citadel, the useless council decides to go on the defense, since they're expecting Saren around this time. But Udina stabs us in the back, where he essentially impounds our ship, so we can't go back to Ilos. This is the moment I hated Udina. Of course, we need a conflict to hinder us, so I have no complaints here. After this betrayal, we are contacted by Captain Anderson to meet us in a nightclub called The Flux. When we get there, Anderson says that we need to get to Ilos, and we get an illusion of choice where we either get Anderson to override the controls at the dock, or in the ambassador's office. Of course, the ambassador's office is the better of the two choices, because he whacks Udina out cold and allows us to escape. So since nothing else matters, we go to Ilos to stop Saren. We drop on the Mako, to which we fight our way past Geth to get a closed gate open. The Geth here aren't too hard, you're bound to have powerful weapons by now. We get back in the Mako until the gate is open, until 2 force shields close us in. And a VI program going by the name Vigil tells us about the Reapers wiping out the Protheans, and how every civilization at its peak were always hunted down to extinction, and that the current state of the galaxy is next. This time, the VI spotted a weakness that gives us a chance to defeat Sovereign. When Sovereign attacks the Citadel, we can be able to take temporary control of the Citadel's functions. We can finally take temporary control of the Citadel's functions and finally put a stop to the galactic genocide that started millions of years ago. Then it's back to the Mako, and we've got to beat the clock part where the conduit is about to close. Getting to the conduit is actually pretty tense. You have to ignore everything and go straight to the conduit. The conduit mass relay jumps you to the Citadel in the middle of a Reaper attack in the station. The next part of the game is getting close to the control room. You will be fighting Husks, Geth, Krogan warlords, turrets, and whatever else that stands in your way. The challenge here, I say, is moderate. It's quite challenging, but it doesn't feel unfair. At this point, a lot of enemies charge at you, and it gets really annoying when the Krogan warlords try to regain health when you shoot them down, and you need to keep shooting, which I wish they wouldn't do. Otherwise, this is just a forward charge that makes the player feel powerful. I was in the level 30s when I completed this game on both playthroughs, and then there's the final battle. We make it to the control room, and as such, we confront Saren for the last time. Now, the game forces you to reject Saren, but I would have liked a bad ending where you join the Reapers and the galaxy is wiped out. Obviously, you can't transfer a save to the next game, but I would have liked something like that, because I would like this game to have bad endings just like the sequels afterwards that stops the story right there. If your persuasion is high enough, you can convince Saren to redeem himself and do the right thing. In both playthroughs, I managed to do this, and Saren committed suicide. And then we've got our final big choice before the close of the game. Basically, the council ship, the Ascension, is going to be destroyed, and we get a choice on whether to save them or not. Now, the game considers the choice to let them die a renegade option, but I beg to differ. The fate of the galaxy is at stake. But hey, I didn't program this game. Maybe the writers have a good explanation for why this is a renegade option. Of course, I like the renegade variation of the ending because the council were useless. Good riddance. Then we've got the final boss fight. Well, Saren is transformed into a vessel for Sovereign, and goddamn do I hate this boss fight. Lowering his shields is really tough, because aiming is a hassle. I guess you can pause the game to the abilities in the weapon wheel to keep track of where he's jumping, but who's willing to bet that was an accidental convenience? Saren as a boss fight isn't fun because he jumps all over the place, and goddamn is he a bullet sponge. I think the programmers got a little too carried away with this. Hard doesn't equal for fun. I wish the Saren boss fight was designed differently. You basically need to max out every ability and throw everything you have at the boss fight. You need to make sure that this nuisance dies before you do. I can't imagine how hard this guy must be on higher difficulties. If you manage to defeat him, he dissolves and Soren is destroyed in the space battle, but a piece of him crashes into the control room. After the battle, Captain Anderson gets our squad mates out of the wreck, and there's a brief fake out where they leave Shepard's fate unclear, until they show us that he or she is alive and well. The epilogue is actually pretty good. It differs in scenery based on the playthrough and whether you decided to save the council or not. If you save the council, humanity is part of the council. If you let the council die, Anderson and Udina decide to have a strictly human council with a human chairman. We get the choice on whether Udina or Anderson will take the position, and of course I either said Anderson or that I didn't care. I can't believe slimy Udina is an option. We get the dramatic walkaway where Udina or Anderson makes a speech about rising up, and we get a shot of Shepard with a background behind him or her. And then the game ends with the awesome end credits song. So despite the frustrating boss, the ending picks up a lot. Now, this is intended to be a trilogy. Choices are more like variations. As mentioned before, it's less so what you do and how you do it. This game doesn't drastically change throughout the trilogy. So what are my overall thoughts? The remastered Mass Effect 1, even with the improvements, is quite clunky in its combat, and a lot of staples in the franchise aren't introduced until the second game, and that's where the series really became a masterpiece. Of course, this being the first entry, it's not surprising that this game would have a lot of issues. Games that try new things usually do this. Mass Effect 1 had an original but flawed way of playing. It would be nice to have more true player choice, but you can't because the plot is more linear, and having a voice protagonist too would be too much work. So basically, the positive traits of this game come down to most of the story, unique design, visual design, and music, while its flaws come down to the clunky combat, lack of true player choice, and its dated physics and mechanics. All of these criticisms get rectified in the sequel, so at least it's not like this the entire journey. But I can understand why many would be tempted to just skip this game and just use the Dark Horse Comics thing for the second game, where you can make the major decisions there. I kinda wish they reworked the combat to be more like a proper third-person shooter, because I feel these improvements aren't enough to sell me on the game completely. The shooting isn't the worst thing in the world, but compared to the sequels, this game's combat hasn't aged well. I guess it can be fun sometimes, depending on who you're facing, and I like how every weapon is actually usable, and not just an unusable worthless Nerf gun like the sniper rifle, where precision is impossible. That's been fixed, and now you can actually use the sniper, so I actually got invested with these weapons. Overall, Mass Effect 1 is a heavily flawed game, but what it does well, it does so well, that it brings the game back up from its faults. The story is amazing, and it's the main incentive to play the game. I'm going to give this game a 7.5 out of 10. I felt a 7 was too low. Since this is just the first of 3 games in a collection, I can't judge the whole package. But tune in next time where I critique the second game, which expect me to be praising it to the stars. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories about mystery boxes?